let's go. Okay, let's do this. Okay. Okay. Alright, we're setting up. Alright, let's grab this sub. I'm gonna go put this in Steam.
corazón es más frío que un helado y por eso de lado yo.
Yes, you guys read the title right. Jax VR is most likely not dead. I am not saying that he is not dead at all. It's 100% chance he's not dead. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's like a lot of evidence that proves that he is not dead. As you see from this text right here, it shows that he is online. Also from this one, and also for this one. He's been online a whole lot. You guys may be saying, oh, what if it's his cousin or what if it's his parents? Now think about this. His cousin's on his VR, connected to his Discord, and everything. Why would his cousin be playing on his account and everything when he could just make his own and do all of that stuff? I've also had people tell me that he changed his name to Troll for 30 seconds and then changed it right back after. There's also been many reports of people seeing him in Code Creator. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the parents. Now think about this. Why would your parents, first of all, be playing on your VR? Second of all, why would they be using your account? Third of all, why would they be looking at your Discord on Discord? And then fourth of all, why would your parents sound exactly like you? All of these is a lot of evidence that he's still alive. So guys, I want you to comment down. Do you think he's alive or do you think he's not? Make sure to add the reason why you don't think so or you do think so. Also, if anybody has any evidence, please tell me
MMA fighter who's 6'5". My name is Madison, and I'm 27 years old. 3 years ago, I finally left Derek after 4 years of the worst relationship of my life. But leaving him didn't mean he left me alone. The threats started the day after I moved out. I was at Target, just trying to buy some basic things for my new apartment, when this guy around my age smiled at me in the cleaning supplies aisle. Just a friendly smile, nothing weird. I smiled back because that's what normal people do. 2 hours later, Derek showed up at my new place. I still don't know how he found my address. He banged on the door so hard I thought he'd break it down. I saw you at Target, he screamed through the door. I saw that guy looking at you. You think you can just move on? You think I'm going to let some random guy think he has a chance with you? I called the cops. They came. They talked to him. He was calm by then. All smiles and apologies. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said we'd just broken up and emotions were high.
Go.
Officers
Water,
basically
water,
told us
water.
to move on with our lives. That was the first time. The second time was at a coffee shop. With me while making my latte. Derek was somehow there, sitting in the corner. I hadn't even seen him. The barista.
Just copy and paste. There we go. Okay. Alright, now I got the link.
Welcome to r/entitled parents, where entitled mother gets herself tased. Our next Reddit post is from a gay interview.
What's the most extreme way your parents kept things fair? My parents forced me and my sisters to physically experience each other's pain because they believed triplets should remain perfectly equal in all things, including suffering. Dad built torture devices in our basement designed to inflict precise amounts of pain to match whatever injury one of us sustained. Mom kept detailed logs of every scrape and bruise we'd experienced since birth to ensure the suffering was distributed equally. When Annabelle broke her arm falling off her bike at age 7, Dad held Jane and me down while Mom snapped wooden rulers against our forearms until we screamed at the same pitch as Annabelle had. When Jane needed dental surgery, Annabelle and I were strapped to chairs while Dad extracted one healthy tooth from each of us without anesthesia. Equal pain, equal bond, he'd chant while we sobbed. They homeschooled us after teachers started eliminating and they vomited the same number of times. When Annabelle got migraines, Jane and I had to stare into strobe lights while listening to deafening sounds until we collapsed. Our parents documented everything with photos and videos, proud of their innovative parenting that would guarantee we stayed bonded forever. They convinced us that without this shared suffering, we'd grow apart and die alone like the separated triplets in their fake case studies. We tried to escape when we turned 15. Jane had been secretly saving money from selling handmade jewelry online, and we planned to run away together. But our parents had installed trackers in our shoes and caught us at the bus station. The punishment was severe. They made us hold hot coals until our palms matched the blisters on Jane's hands from when they'd caught her. After that, they withdrew us from even online activities and monitored us constantly. We tried telling a delivery driver we needed help, but Mom intercepted and convinced him we were mentally ill triplets who shared delusions. He left thinking he'd witnessed a sad medical condition. When we were 17, Annabelle got pregnant after our parents forced her to attend a religious youth camp to socialize normally for a week. She hid it for months, terrified of what the equality punishment would be. But when Mom found the pregnancy test, she wasn't angry about the pregnancy itself. She was excited about the challenge. This is the ultimate test of your bond, she said. All three of you will experience motherhood together. She started researching how to simulate every aspect of pregnancy on Jane and me, from morning sickness to weight gain. They force-fed us hormones that made us nauseated and gain weight. They attached weighted bags to our stomachs that grew heavier each month to match Annabelle's belly. When Annabelle felt the baby kick, they used electrical pulses to make our abdomen spasm. We begged them to let us leave, to get Annabelle proper prenatal care, but they said the local midwife who'd agreed to help was all we needed. This midwife was another extremist who believed in alternative birth experiences and saw nothing wrong with our parents' plan for synchronized labor. Dad spent months constructing a machine that would replicate labor contractions using electrical muscle stimulation and hydraulic pressure. He tested it on animals first, making me watch as he forced pigs to experience simulated birth pains until they passed out. Mom interviewed dozens of mothers about their labor experiences, creating a minute-by-minute pain schedule she'd follow during Annabelle's delivery. They cleared out the garage and set up 3 medical beds side by side, one for Annabelle to actually give birth, and 2 equipped with Dad's torture devices for Jane and me. 3 days ago, Annabelle went into labor. Our parents' faces lit up with excitement as they herded us all toward the garage. "This is it, girls," Mom said. "The ultimate test of your bond." They strapped Jane and me onto our tables while the midwife tended to Annabelle. Dad connected electrodes all over our bodies and showed us the remote that would control our pain levels. "Remember," he said, "you need to dilate together, crown together, push together. Perfect synchronization, or we start over." Annabelle's first real contraction hit, and Dad pressed the button on his machine. The pain that shot through my abdomen was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A crushing, twisting agony that made me scream until my throat burned. Through tears, I could see Jane convulsing on her table while Annabelle moaned through her actual contraction. Mom clapped her hands. "Perfect. That was beautifully synchronized." The contraction ended and we all gasped for air. Hours of agony passed with each contraction perfectly matched across all 3 of us. Then the midwife checked Annabelle and her face went pale. "The baby is breech," she said. "We need to get her to a hospital for a C-section or both mother and baby could die." Mom and Dad exchanged looks of horror, but not for the reason I expected. "A C-section?" Mom said. "But we don't have the equipment to perform surgery on all all three. Dad was already moving toward his tool cabinet. We do have scalpels. If one gets cut open, they all get cut open. He pulled out 3 identical blades and handed 2 to Mom. We'll have to do it ourselves. Equal cuts, equal depth, the only way to maintain balance. Dad's hand shook as he held the scalpel above my stomach, and I could see sweat dripping down his face while he tried to steady his grip. He'd cut up dead pigs and rabbits in the basement, but never actual human skin, and his fingers kept twitching like he was having second thoughts about slicing into his own daughter. Mom took her position next to Jane's table with her blade ready, while the midwife just stood there frozen between all 3 of us, watching Annabelle writhe and moan through another contraction. The midwife suddenly cleared her throat and said she needed to check Annabelle's dilation one more time before anybody did any cutting, because the baby's position might have changed. Dad paused with the scalpel still hovering over my skin, and I could feel the cold metal almost touching me, while he looked at the midwife with this confused expression, like he hadn't considered that the baby actually needed to survive this whole thing. The midwife bent down between Annabelle's legs to examine her, and that's when I felt the electrode on my shoulder starting to slip from all the sweat pouring off me. I shifted just a tiny bit to make it fall off completely, and the machine started beeping this loud alarm that made Dad curse and drop the scalpel onto the metal tray with a clatter. He rushed over to the machine, muttering about cheap adhesive while trying to stick the electrode back on my skin, but it wouldn't stay because I was so wet with sweat. Those few seconds while he fumbled with the wires gave me just enough time to catch the midwife's eye, and I mouthed the words, "She'll die," while nodding toward Annabelle, who was getting paler by the minute. The midwife's face went white, and I saw real fear flash across her eyes, like she was finally understanding that this wasn't just some alternative birthing experience, but actual torture that could kill my sister and her baby. She stood up fast and announced that Annabelle was losing too much blood internally, and the baby's heart rate was dropping to dangerous levels that meant they both could die if we didn't get to a hospital immediately. Mom's excited expression faltered, and she lowered her scalpel because even in her twisted mind, a dead grandchild wasn't part of the perfect equality plan she'd been dreaming about for months. Dad started arguing with Mom about whether they should continue or stop, while the midwife leaned close to Annabelle, and I heard her whisper for her to scream louder to cover any other sounds that might happen. Annabelle let out this horrible wail that echoed off the garage walls, and I saw the midwife's hand moving slowly toward her pocket, where the outline of her phone was visible through the thin fabric. Dad got frustrated with their arguing and decided to restart the whole synchronization process by turning off the machine completely so he could recalibrate all the settings from scratch. The sudden quiet after all that electrical humming felt strange, and in that moment of silence, I twisted my wrist hard against the leather strap, using a trick I'd figured out during past punishments. My thumb bone made this sick popping sound as it slipped out of the joint and the pain shot up my arm, but I dislocated it enough times before to know how to do it quietly. Mom heard the crack though and whipped around to look at me with fury in her eyes before she slapped me hard across the face for trying to escape. The midwife yelled that the baby was coming out feet first, which meant Annabelle needed surgery right now, or they'd both die from complications. While everyone was focused on Annabelle's screaming, I spotted something under the medical tray near the midwife, and my heart nearly stopped when I realized it was her phone screen showing an active 911 call that had been running for 2 whole minutes already. The midwife kept talking loudly about medical terms like breech presentation and uterine rupture and fetal distress, making sure whoever was listening on the other end heard everything about 3 teenage girls being tortured in a garage. Dad finally got his machine working again and grabbed the control dial with this determined look on his face before cranking the power up higher than he'd ever set it before. The midwife seems to be playing a deeper game here than just going along with this nightmare. I wonder if she knew all along what she was walking into and came prepared. That hidden phone call running for 2 whole minutes while she loudly electricity shot through my body and Jane's at the same time, making us both scream so loud that our voices mixed with Annabelle's real labor cries into this horrible chorus of pain. Mom actually clapped her hands together and started taking notes in her journal about what she called the beautiful harmony of our shared suffering, while tears streamed down all our faces. The contractions kept coming faster now, and each time Dad would match them with electrical pulses that made my muscles seize up so hard I thought my bones might break from the tension. Jane was convulsing on her table, and I could see blood where the straps had cut into her wrists from all the thrashing, while Annabelle kept pushing, even though the baby was stuck in the wrong position. The midwife kept up her loud medical commentary about hemorrhaging and oxygen deprivation, while secretly making sure that phones stayed connected to emergency services without my parents noticing. Dad adjusted more dials on his machine, trying to perfect the synchronization between our screams like he was conducting some sick orchestra of his daughter's agony. Something cut through the pain, a sound that wasn't our screaming or the machine's humming. It started faint but grew louder, that wailing sound I'd only heard on TV shows, and Dad's hand froze on the control dial as his face went completely white. The sirens were getting closer, coming up our long driveway, and Dad dropped the scalpel he'd been holding so it clattered on the concrete floor. He started yelling at Mom to grab the cameras and hide the notebooks, but she was still bent over her journal writing about our synchronized breathing patterns. The midwife's face stayed calm while she moved toward the side door, and I heard the soft click of the lock turning. Cars screeched to a stop right outside the garage, and someone pounded on the main door so hard the whole wall shook. Dad grabbed the handles of my table and started pushing it toward the basement stairs, but Jane thrashed against her straps, making the wheels lock up. The garage door flew open, and a man in a sheriff's uniform burst in with 3 deputies behind him, all their hands hovering near their guns. Dad let go of my table and started talking fast about how this was a private medical procedure, and they had no right to be here without a warrant. Sheriff Allred took one look at me, and Jane strapped down with wires attached all over our bodies, and Annabelle bleeding on the birthing bed. He grabbed his radio and called for multiple ambulances while telling Dad to step away from the machines immediately. Dad's eyes went wild, and he lunged for the power switch to destroy everything, but a deputy tackled him hard into the concrete. Mom started screaming about our rare genetic condition that required synchronized experiences and how they were interrupting critical medical care. The midwife suddenly became the most helpful person in the room, telling the sheriff that Annabelle needed immediate transport for emergency surgery or she'd bleed out. She handed over her medical bag and mentioned quietly that she had recordings of everything the parents had planned to do to us. More people rushed into the garage, and paramedics started carefully pulling the electrodes off my skin, while another team worked on getting Annabelle stable enough to move. The lead paramedic's face face got darker with each burn mark he found on my arms and chest, and he documented everything with a camera while removing the wires. They lifted Annabelle onto a stretcher first, with a midwife climbing into the ambulance beside her, now claiming she'd been forced to participate and was terrified for her own safety. Jane and I got loaded into a second ambulance, and through the back windows I could see Dad face down on the ground with his hands cuffed behind him, still shouting about his constitutional rights. The ride to the hospital felt like flying after years of never leaving our property, the trees and buildings rushing past the windows while the paramedic kept checking my vitals. At the hospital, everything moved so fast, with Annabelle getting wheeled straight to surgery, while Jane and I got taken to separate rooms in the emergency department. A doctor named Julia Abernathy took over Annabelle's case and promised she'd do everything possible to save both her and the baby. For the first time in our lives, we were in different rooms, Jane somewhere down the hall while nurses cleaned the burns on my skin and asked me questions I didn't know how to answer. They wanted to know my medical history, but all I could tell them was what Mom had written in her notebooks about our synchronized injuries. A nurse held my hand when I started shaking and told me I was safe now, that nobody would hurt me anymore, but I couldn't stop listening for Jane's voice through the walls. Hours passed with doctors coming in and out, taking pictures of every scar and burn, asking about the machines and the basement and how long this had been happening. I told them about the tooth extractions when we were 8 and the hot coals when we were 15, and they wrote everything down with these horrified looks they tried to hide. Someone brought me real food from the cafeteria, not the measured portions Mom always gave us to keep our weights identical, and I ate until my stomach hurt from being so full. Through the window, I could see news vans pulling up outside and nurses whispering about the torture house story that was already spreading online. A social worker arrived and started explaining about protective custody and emergency housing, using words like trauma and recovery that felt too big for what had happened to us. She said they'd found dozens of hard drives at our house with years of videos showing everything our parents had done, evidence that would put them away for a long time. The sheriff came by to check on us and said Dad was in custody and Mom was evaluated at a psychiatric facility, that they couldn't hurt us anymore, but all I could think about was Annabelle in surgery and whether her baby would survive after everything Dad's machine had done during the labor. Dr. Abernathy finally came out after what felt like days to tell us the baby was alive but tiny, in the intensive care unit, and Annabelle had lost a lot of blood but would recover. The social worker showed up less than an hour later with a camera and a clipboard full of forms. Mariam Ahmed had kind eyes, but her hands shook when she saw the burns on my arms from the electrodes. She took pictures of every mark on my body while asking me to turn this way and that under the bright hospital lights. She wanted to know if there were more machines at the house that could hurt other kids, and I told her about the basement full of Dad's devices. She wrote down everything I said about the tooth pliers and the hot coal holders and the strobe light helmets he'd built over the years. A nurse brought in consent forms for Annabelle's surgery since we were all 18 now, and I had to be her emergency contact. My hand cramped trying to sign my name because I'd never signed anything official before. Dr. Abernathy came to explain that she'd do everything possible to save both Annabelle and the baby, but the surgery would be risky after everything Annabelle had been through. Mariam took Jane to a different room for her interview, while explaining that our statements had to be separate for legal reasons. Being apart from Jane felt wrong after 18 years of doing everything together, but I understood why they needed independent stories. I sat alone in my hospital room listening to the beeping machines and waiting for someone to tell me what would happen next. Sheriff Allred came back to update us that Dad was locked up at the county jail, and Mom was at the psychiatric hospital for evaluation. He said our house was now a crime scene with yellow tape everywhere, and asked if we had anywhere else to go. I couldn't answer because we'd never been anywhere else except that house. The sheriff said not to worry, and that social services would figure something out for us. Hours dragged by with nurses checking on me and bringing food I couldn't eat because my stomach was in knots worrying about Annabelle. Finally, Dr. Abernathy came out of surgery looking tired but relieved. She said the baby was alive but tiny and needed intensive care, while Annabelle had lost a lot of blood but would make it. My legs gave out from relief, and a nurse caught me before I hit the floor and helped me into a chair. The next morning, a woman in a suit showed up saying she was Assistant District Attorney Sierra Valentine. She had a list of charges against our parents that included child abuse and torture and attempted murder. She explained each charge and what evidence they had from the house, including all of Mom's notebooks documenting years of torture. Sierra said the case was strong, with the videos and photos our parents had taken being the main evidence against them. A man named Hiram Ainsworth arrived to do what he called a crisis evaluation and found Jane hyperventilating in her room. He taught us breathing exercises to calm down and said we'd need lots of therapy, but first we had to feel safe. He gave us each a card with his number and said to call anytime we felt scared or confused about what was happening. The midwife was at the police station giving her statement, and the detective told us she admitted to knowing about the alternative birthing plans. She said she believed in natural birth experiences but never expected our parents to try surgery on us. The prosecutor offered her a deal to testify against our parents in exchange for a lighter sentence since she'd called 911. Child Protective Services filed emergency paperwork to put us in protective custody even though we were technically adults. They said our isolation and lack of basic life skills meant we needed protection while they found us somewhere safe to live. We got moved to a secure part of the hospital where visitors had to be approved and security guards stood outside our doors. There's something oddly convenient about how the midwife transforms from accomplice to key witness the moment those sirens show up. She hands over recordings she just happened to make, claims she was forced. By afternoon, reporters were calling the hospital asking about the triplet torture case and trying to get interviews. Mariam explained we didn't have to talk to anyone from the media and helped us understand our rights. Hospital security started checking everyone who came to our floor and turned away 3 different news crews who tried to sneak in dressed as medical staff. The head nurse moved us to rooms without our names on the doors and gave us fake patient numbers to protect our privacy. I watched the news on the tiny hospital TV and saw our house on the screen with police cars everywhere. The reporter called it a house of horrors and said neighbors were shocked because they never knew we existed. They interviewed someone from the religious camp where Annabelle got pregnant, who said she seemed shy but normal. The news kept showing the same photo of our parents from their driver's licenses and calling them monsters. Mariam turned off the TV and said we didn't need to watch that stuff right now. She brought us books and puzzles to keep our minds busy while we waited to find out what would happen next. Jane started crying when she realized we'd never go back to that house even though it was the only home we'd ever known. known. I held her hand while she sobbed about not knowing how to live in the real world. The therapist came back to check on us and said feeling lost was normal after what we'd been through. He promised things would get easier once we had time to adjust and learn how to be regular people. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking about Annabelle's baby fighting to survive in an incubator down the hall. The next morning, Miriam came to tell us Mom's bail hearing was happening that afternoon, and we could watch on a video link if we wanted. Jane grabbed my hand so tight it hurt while we watched Mom stand in front of the judge in an orange jumpsuit. She kept saying she needed to be released to take care of us since we couldn't function without her guidance. The prosecutor stood up and played the 911 call right there in the courtroom. Everyone heard the midwife describing 3 teenage girls being tortured, while Mom screamed in the background about maintaining equality. The judge's face got harder with each second of audio. He set bail at $2 million and ordered Mom to have zero contact with us if she somehow made bail. Mom started crying and reaching toward the camera like she could touch us through the screen. 2 days later, Sheriff Allred came to tell us about what they found at the house. The crime scene techs had pulled dozens of hard drives from Dad's office containing every single torture session since we were babies. There were spreadsheets tracking pain levels and videos labeled with dates going back 17 years. The detective said in 30 years of police work he'd never seen such detailed documentation of abuse. Dad had even written reports analyzing which torture methods produced the most synchronized responses between us. They found the basement full of devices we didn't even know existed, things Dad had been planning to use as we got older. After a week in the hospital, they moved us to a supervised apartment building for young adults aging out of foster care. The place had staff at the front desk 24 hours a day, and someone checked on us every few hours. Jane stood at the window for an hour just watching people walk by on the sidewalk. We could leave whenever we wanted as long as we told the staff where we were going. The first time I walked to the corner store alone to buy milk, my hands shook the whole time. 4 days after moving in, Annabelle spiked a fever that hit 103 degrees. Dr. Abernathy rushed to adjust her antibiotics and run more tests while we sat by her bed taking turns putting cold washcloths on her forehead. The infection from her C-section had spread, and they had to open her back up to clean everything out. Jane held my hand so tight during the second surgery that we both had bruises. Dr. Abernathy finally came out to say Annabelle would be okay, but needed stronger antibiotics for at least 2 weeks. Sierra Valentine met with us once Annabelle was stable to explain what would happen with our parents' case. She said we could testify at a trial which might take a year to happen, or our parents could accept a plea deal and admit what they did. She warned us that trials meant reliving everything in front of strangers and being questioned by defense lawyers who would try to make us look like liars. Jane started shaking at the thought of seeing our parents again in court. During my first real therapy session with Hiram Ainsworth, he asked me to describe a normal day from before. When I told him about the morning pain checks where Mom would measure our pupils to make sure we all felt equally tired, he had to take a minute to compose himself. He helped me understand that the worst part wasn't even the physical pain, but how they made us believe we would literally die without it. For the first time in my life, I sat in his office for a whole hour without expecting to be hurt for being still. A letter came from the midwife's lawyer saying she wanted to apologize, and her medical board had suspended her license while they investigated. Miriam brought us the sealed envelope and said we could read it whenever we felt ready, or never at all. Jane wanted to burn it immediately, but I needed to keep it, maybe to read someday when I felt stronger. We put it in a drawer in our new apartment. Jane and I got into our first real fight about visiting the baby. She was terrified of reporters finding us at the hospital and taking pictures, but I desperately needed to see if the baby looked like Annabelle. We screamed at each other for 20 minutes before the apartment staff knocked to check on us. Finally, we agreed to visit at 2 in the morning when the NICU was quietest and reporters wouldn't be around. The digital forensics team sent Sierra Valentine a report confirming everything we'd told them. They found the tracking chips our parents had sewn into every pair of shoes we owned and the receivers that picked up our vital signs from monitors in our mattresses. The data showed they knew our heart rates, breathing patterns, and movement every second for the past 5 years. They even found software Dad wrote to alert them if any of us showed signs of independent thought based on our sleep patterns. Sierra warned us the defense would try to claim our parents were mentally ill and genuinely believed they were helping us stay bonded. She showed us examples of how they'd minimize everything, calling the torture devices misguided parenting tools, and saying the pain synchronization was based on real psychological theories they'd misunderstood. She prepared us for how they'd paint our parents as loving but confused rather than deliberately cruel. The next morning, Miriam called to say Annabelle could finally see her baby, and we rushed to the NICU together. The nurse led us through double doors to a room full of tiny beds with machines beeping everywhere. Annabelle's hands shook as she reached into the incubator to touch the smallest fingers I'd ever seen. The baby opened her eyes and looked right at Annabelle, who started crying so hard she couldn't speak. Jane and I stood on either side of her as she picked up the baby for the first time. The nurse showed her how to hold the tiny body against her chest for skin contact. Annabelle whispered that she wanted to name her Hope because that's what she gave us. We all cried watching her rock the baby back and forth. The nurse took pictures of us together and said Hope was getting stronger every day. Later that afternoon, Miriam met us in the hospital cafeteria with paperwork about victim compensation funds. She explained the state would pay for our therapy and living expenses while we recovered. The forms were confusing, but she helped us fill out every line. She said the money would start coming in about 6 weeks. The relief of not worrying about food or rent made my chest feel lighter. 2 days later, my phone started buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Someone had leaked a video from our basement to the internet and it was spreading everywhere. The messages called us liars and attention seekers and said we deserved what happened. Jane threw her phone against the wall when she saw the comments under the video. Sierra Valentine called within an hour saying she'd already filed emergency orders to remove it. She said whoever posted it would face charges for distributing evidence. The hospital security had to escort us out the back entrance because reporters were waiting at the front. That weekend, we went grocery shopping for the first time without supervision. Jane was pushing the cart while I read labels trying to figure out what normal people ate. We turned into the cereal aisle and Jane froze completely. A family with triplet toddlers was picking out cereal boxes and the 3 kids looked exactly alike. Jane's breathing got fast and shallow and she grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. I pulled her away from the family and helped her breathe into a paper bag from my pocket. We left our full cart in the middle of the store and went straight home. Jane didn't talk for the rest of the day. The next week, Hiram led a group session about finding our individual identities. He asked us each to say one thing we liked that our sisters didn't. The question made my stomach hurt because I'd never been allowed to like different things. Jane finally said she hated the color yellow even though Annabelle loved it. Annabelle admitted she didn't actually like reading, but pretended because I did. I said I'd always wanted short hair, but kept it long to match theirs. Hiram said these differences were normal and healthy, but it felt like betrayal. He gave us homework to find 3 more differences before next session. Sierra called that evening to say the DA was offering our parents a deal. Why does the midwife suddenly want to apologize now that her medical license is on the line? The timing feels awfully convenient for someone who watched this happen for years without doing anything. If they pleaded guilty and accepted psychiatric treatment, they'd get 25 years minimum. No trial meant we wouldn't have to testify, but also no chance of them getting out early. She said we had a week to decide if we wanted to accept or go to trial. The idea of facing them in court made me sick, but 25 years felt too short. A volunteer tutor named Margaret started coming to help me study for the GED. She brought practice books and showed me how to solve math problems I'd never seen before. Our parents had taught us to read and write, but nothing about science or history. Margaret was patient when I didn't know basic things like what Congress was. She said I was smart and just needed to catch up on what I'd missed. Studying felt like freedom even when the work was hard. Every page I understood was something my parents couldn't take away. Annabelle met with a family lawyer about protecting Hope from our parents. The lawyer explained that grandparents could sometimes claim rights to see grandchildren. She filed paperwork to terminate any rights before our parents could ask for them. The stack of legal documents was thick and full of words I didn't understand. Annabelle signed every page while Hope slept in her carrier. The lawyer said the court would likely approve it given the criminal charges. Sierra needed us to verify some evidence photos and brought a laptop to our apartment. She warned us the images would be hard to see but legally necessary. The first photo showed the torture devices in our basement and my hands started shaking. The second showed the charts Mom kept of our injuries over the years. By the third photo of the garage setup, Jane's eyes went blank and she stopped responding to questions. Sierra closed the laptop immediately and said 3 photos were enough for verification. She helped Jane come back to herself with grounding exercises Hiram had taught us. 3 weeks later, we sat in the courthouse for a pre-trial hearing. Dad's lawyer argued he wasn't competent to stand trial because of his obsessive beliefs. The prosecutor showed the psychiatric evaluation proving Dad understood his actions caused harm. He told the psychiatrist he knew we felt pain, but thought it was necessary for our bond. Mom's lawyer tried the same argument about her mental state. The evaluation showed she'd kept detailed notes about which punishments worked best. The judge ruled they were both competent to stand trial and set a date for 2 months away. The prosecutor called us the next week to say the midwife wanted to make a deal. She sat across from us in a small conference room at the courthouse, her hands folded on the table. Sierra explained she'd agreed to testify against our parents and enter a supervision program for medical professionals. The midwife couldn't look at us while Sierra outlined the terms. She'd keep her license but could only practice under strict oversight for the next 10 years. Every birth she attended would be monitored by another professional. Jane's hands clenched into fists, but she stayed quiet. The midwife signed the cooperation agreement and left without saying a word to us. Sierra said her testimony would strengthen the case against our parents. 2 days later, Sierra asked if we wanted to give victim impact statements at sentencing. The thought of standing in court with our parents watching made my stomach turn. Jane said she couldn't do it either. Annabelle was still too weak from the infection to even consider it. Sierra suggested we could write statements instead. She said written statements were just as powerful, and the judge would read every word. I spent 3 nights working on mine at the kitchen table while Hope slept. The words came slowly at first. I wrote about the hot coals and the electrodes and the years of matching bruises. I wrote about believing we'd die without the pain. I wrote about Hope deserving better than what we got. Jane wrote hers in one long session, crying the whole time. Annabelle dictated hers to me because holding a pen still hurt her hands. We gave them to Sierra sealed in envelopes because we couldn't read each other's yet. The plea negotiations started the following week. Our parents' lawyers had seen all the evidence, including the videos and the torture devices. Sierra said they knew a jury would convict on every charge. Dad's lawyer called first to discuss terms. Mom's followed an hour later. They wanted 20 years, but Sierra held firm at 25 minimum. The lawyers went back to their clients while we waited in Sierra's office. Hope fussed in her carrier and Annabelle bounced her gently. The phone rang after 2 hours. Both lawyers said their clients would accept the deal. 25 years minimum, no contact orders, and they'd waive their right to appeal. Sierra said the relief on our faces told her everything. The formal plea hearing happened 3 days later. We didn't have to go, but Sierra said we could if we wanted. Jane and I went while Annabelle stayed with Hope. Our parents stood in orange jumpsuits with their lawyers beside them. The judge read each charge and asked how they plead. Guilty, Dad said to each one. Mom did the same. The judge accepted the pleas and scheduled sentencing for the next month. As part of the agreement, the judge ordered all the video recordings destroyed after the appeal period ended. Only written transcripts would be kept for legal records. Sierra said this was unusual, but she'd pushed for it knowing those videos haunted us. The prosecutor's office would oversee the destruction personally. We'd get confirmation when it was done. Knowing those videos wouldn't exist forever made my chest feel less tight. The midwife's medical board hearing happened 2 weeks later. Sierra attended to present evidence of her involvement. The board suspended her license for 5 years and required ethics training before she could practice again. After that, she'd need supervision for another 5 years. It wasn't full justice, but it meant she couldn't hurt other families. Miriam visited us the next day with housing applications. She'd found a program for young adults transitioning from difficult situations. The subsidized vouchers would cover most of the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment. We could move in whenever we felt ready. The idea of choosing our own space felt impossible after years of being told where to go. Miriam helped us fill out the paperwork while Hope napped. She said the approval usually took a few weeks, but she'd expedite it given our situation. 3 weeks passed before Annabelle's follow-up appointment with Dr. Abernathy. The infection had cleared and her incision was healing well. The doctor cleared her for light activities like walking and carrying Hope for short periods. She said Hope was meeting all her developmental milestones and gaining weight perfectly. The baby was strong and healthy despite everything. Watching Hope grow gave us something to focus on besides the trial. We enrolled in GED classes at the community center the following week. The schedule was complicated because someone always needed to watch Hope. I took morning classes on Mondays and Wednesdays. Jane went Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Annabelle would start evening classes once she was stronger. The instructor understood our situation without us having to explain much. She gave us extra workbooks to study at home and said we were catching up faster than she expected. The material was hard, but every lesson felt like freedom. 4 nights later, I woke up confused by sunlight streaming through the window. I'd slept through the whole night without nightmares for the first time since the garage. No dreams about electrodes or scalpels or mom's charts. Hope was still sleeping in her crib, and the apartment was quiet. The silence felt peaceful instead of threatening like it had at our parents' house. I made coffee and sat by the window watching people walk their dogs. Normal people doing normal things. Sheriff Allred called that afternoon to say he had something for us. He arrived carrying a manila envelope and a small locked box. Inside were our birth certificates and social security cards recovered from our parents' safe. He'd had to get a court order to retrieve them, but wanted us to have our own documents. The papers proved we existed as individual people, not just as parts of a matched set. Jane held her birth certificate like it might disappear. Annabelle traced her name with her finger. Having official proof of our own identities felt like reclaiming pieces of ourselves our parents had stolen. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the next month, and Sierra asked if we wanted to submit victim impact statements. I spent 3 nights writing mine, crossing out sentences and starting over until I had 2 pages about how we deserve to live as separate people. Jane wrote hers in pencil first, then copied it in pen when she was sure every word was right. Annabelle dictated hers to me while nursing Hope because her hands still shook too much to write steadily. The courtroom was packed when the day came, and my legs felt weak walking to the podium. The prosecutor read my statement into the record while I sat between my sisters, gripping their hands as I heard my own words about the right to exist as individuals. The judge looked directly at us when she acknowledged our courage in breaking free and said the court recognized the severity of what we'd endured. 2 weeks later, Hiram scheduled us for separate therapy sessions to practice independence. Jane signed up for an art class at the community center that met Tuesday evenings while I stayed home with Hope. The first night she left, I kept checking the clock and fighting the urge to text her every 5 minutes. Annabelle paced the apartment until Jane walked through the door 2 hours later, carrying a canvas covered in bright paint. Hiram said the discomfort meant we were growing and learning to exist apart. Something feels calculated about how the midwife waited until now to cooperate, getting a lighter deal while the parents take full blame. Makes me wonder if she knew exactly when to flip sides for the best outcome. The permanent protective orders came through the following week with Sierra explaining every detail at her office. She showed us the specific penalties our parents would face if they tried any contact, including additional prison time. She wrote her direct cell number on 3 business cards and made us program it into our phones. The order covered mail, phone calls, social media, and third-party contact through other people. She said to call immediately if anything suspicious happened, day or night. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from the midwife's lawyer containing her written apology. We sat at the kitchen table staring at the sealed pages before Annabelle put it in a drawer unopened. Jane said maybe we'd read it someday when we were ready, but right now we needed to focus on moving forward. The envelope stayed in that drawer for months while we built our new lives. The reporters finally stopped calling after 2 months and we could go to the grocery store without people staring. The apartment complex manager helped us lock down our social media accounts with privacy settings, so only approved friends could see anything. We deleted most of the old photos and started fresh with new usernames that didn't connect to the case. Hope grew bigger every day and started smiling when she recognized our faces. I studied for my GED tests every morning while she napped, working through practice problems in the kitchen. The science test was first, and my hands were sweating when I sat down at the testing center computer. 3 hours later, I walked out knowing I'd passed and bought myself a coffee to celebrate. Jane started making jewelry again using supplies from the craft store, setting up a small workspace by the window. She opened an online shop with a name that had nothing to do with our past, and sold her first pair of earrings within a week. Every dollar went into a savings account she opened for Hope's future education. Annabelle found a young mother support group that met at the library Wednesday mornings. She was nervous the first time, but came back talking about a woman named Amy, who had a daughter Hope's age. After a few weeks, she was making plans to meet Amy at the park without the whole group. These new friends didn't know our history, and Annabelle wanted to keep it that way. The housing voucher approval came through 6 months after we'd applied, and we spent weeks looking at apartments. We found a 2-bedroom place 10 minutes from the community center with a small balcony and good locks. Annabelle would have her own room with Hope's crib, while Jane and I would share the other bedroom. We signed the lease ourselves and got the keys on a Thursday afternoon. Moving didn't take long since we didn't own much, but every box we carried felt like building something real. The first night in our new place, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor eating off paper plates. Hope crawled around exploring every corner while we planned where to put the secondhand couch we bought. Jane hung her newest jewelry pieces in the window to catch the light. 9 months had passed since that night in the garage when I realized we hadn't talked about our parents in over a week. We were sitting in our living room, which now had actual furniture, watching Hope stack blocks and knock them down. She laughed every time they fell, and we laughed with her. The scars on my arms had faded to thin white lines that I sometimes forgot were there. Jane was teaching herself to cook from library books, and Annabelle had started talking about maybe taking community college classes next year. We still went to therapy every week and probably would for years, but Hiram said we were making real progress. 1 year after that horrible night, we were different people than the ones who'd been strapped to those tables. Hope was walking now, taking shaky steps between us while we cheered. I'd passed 3 of my 4 GED tests and was studying for the last one. Jane's jewelry business had regular customers, and she'd saved almost $2,000. Annabelle had friends who invited her to play dates and birthday parties. We still had nightmares sometimes, and there were days when the trauma felt fresh and raw. Our parents were serving their sentences and would never be able to hurt us again. We weren't fully healed because that kind of damage doesn't just disappear, but we were free and safe and learning who we could become when pain wasn't the only thing connecting us. All right, that's gonna do it for today. Thanks for letting me wonder alongside you. It's been really interesting sharing these moments together. Until we meet again. And hey, subscribe for more content like this.
My sister thought grief made me weak and vulnerable, so I showed her what it actually made me. My sister is a corrupt CPS worker. For as long as I can remember, she's abused her power to help her friends. Didn't matter if the home was neglectful or downright abusive. If the parent was someone she was on good terms with, she'd request a check off them, then turn a blind eye to whatever was going on and declare the home safe. It was really horrible, and about a year ago, I experienced it myself. I was a single mother to a 4-month-old baby, and my husband's funeral had only happened 2 weeks ago when my sister popped by for a wellness check. She had Claire, her infertile best friend with her. They exchanged knowing looks at my door. I asked them what was going on and why they were here, and my sister told me it was just to make sure I'm not letting grief stop me from caring for my baby. She walked around the house, noting down dishes in the sink, and documented my daughter crying because her nappy, that I was about to change, was full. Claire even had the audacity to ask to hold my daughter. "I'll never have children of my own," she said in this sad, almost teary voice. They ended up leaving with my sister telling me she'll be back, saying she was sorry, but this house needed another inspection. Sure enough, a week later, I was feeding my daughter while holding my husband's photo when my sister appeared with Claire again. I asked her why Claire was here, and she told me she just ran into her, and because Claire just loved my baby so much and wanted to see her again, she figured she'd let her come with her. I remember being in literal tears talking to them. I had just played my husband and I's favorite song, but my sister documented my crying as emotional instability. Claire commented to my sister that surely developing around such grief wasn't healthy for a baby. My sister nodded and said she would note it down. They left again, this time making comments about how I should seriously consider giving my baby up. I remember